travel with me back to the scene of this text. A father in his exhausted desperation brings his tormented son to Jesus' disciples. He has but one question. This question is silhouetted in his dialogue with Jesus. And that question is the universal question that all men have, even from boyhood. And that is, do I measure up as a man?
Amen. Amen. Amen.
He's observing his son and his inability to help his tormented son makes him uncertain that he does measure up.
Amen. Amen.
His tormented son has a dumb or mute spirit that does not permit him to give audible expression to his thoughts. So in his desperation to give audible expression to his self-understanding, he convulses, foams at the mouth, gnashes at his teeth, and has suicidal tendencies. No one, his daddy and Jesus' disciples alike, have been able to help him out. Out of this man's indescribable pain, he cries out more than once for help. Number one, he acknowledges Jesus' compassion. The Greek translation helps us with that, and we'll deal with that more in a few moments. But then, after he acknowledges Jesus' compassion, he begs for assistance. If you can do anything, help us. Then he cries out again, and the text says with tears he cries out and says, I believe, but help thou mine unbelief. He's essentially saying, I have some faith, but apparently it's not enough to effect the change I desire to see. This boy is tormented. But any loving father watching his tormented child, and he feels incapable of helping that child, is likewise tormented. Something is wrong with the boy. But y'all, something is wrong with the man. Why does this father so desperately plead for compassion and mercy? Why is it that he is so appreciative of compassion and mercy? It's because the boy's suffering, the boy's tormented condition developed under this man's care. Now, if I could say that like I see it, we would just have to pause there for a few moments and think about it. It was not that this boy was born this way. It is not a question of who sinned. Did this boy sin or his parents that he was born this way? No, this condition developed after birth. In other words, according to verse 21, this condition developed when he was a child. It happened while under this father's watch. You see, you have to understand that in this culture, there are some things that was expected of the father. The father was to provide, the father was to protect, and the father was to prepare. If there was, and we sing this on Tuesday nights in our Bible study, if the son needed bread, he asked his father for it. Because his father was to provide it. If there was danger facing the house, daddy would step up. And at the very risk of his life, protect his family. He was to protect. But he also was to prepare that boy. And now this boy, under his daddy's watch, is tormented, which means the daddy didn't adequately protect him. You see, the Greeks understood humanity from a tripartite perspective. That we're not just physical bodies, but we are spirits and souls housed in a physical body.
Amen.
And because we are spirit and souls housed in a physical body, that an ill spirit and ill soul would eventually manifest in the body.
Amen.
So they understood healing from the standpoint of if there's sickness, this sickness is very likely connected to the spirit and soul being diseased.
Amen.
That's why the whole context of the Bible is a context of people wanting to be right with God and trying to understand how they could be in right relationship and fellowship with God, because they understood that if you were not right with God, then it would manifest itself in other ways. So then, in our culture, we would say this boy has a speech impediment. Help me if you can. And we would say that his speech impediment also causes him to have some other issues. He's got self-esteem issues.
Amen.
So out of his self-esteem issues, he's depressed and tries to commit suicide.
Amen.
And then we would say there's apparently some other physical malady because he has seizures, convulsions. And we would take him to the doctor so the doctor could prescribe some medicine.
Amen.
But not in that culture. In their culture, they call it a dumb spirit.
Amen.
Because their understanding was the body and soul live so close together, they caught each other's diseases. So I think I ought to tell you, many of you may be here today thinking that it's important that you go to the doctor, but you can sleep during the preaching. But your rushing to the doctor might be because you slept during the preaching. It might be your diseased spirit and soul that's manifesting itself through the illness of your body. Process of healing, they understood, was either natural, which would deal with dietary laws. The Old Testament is filled with dietary laws. Or with adequate rest. Rest was so important to God, even he rested. 6 days he created the world, but on the seventh day he rested. It was so important to God that he said to his people that remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. The Sabbath day was the seventh day of rest. It was, you've come out of slavery where all you know is to work. I want you to work, but take some time off to rest. So the process of healing for them was either dietary, natural, or rest, natural. They had natural processes. And when the natural didn't work, they resorted to the supernatural. The supernatural was there's some spiritual or soulial malady. And those spiritual and soulial maladies can only be cured by the Creator. How many of you know that since there is a Creator, the Creator knows how to not only create life, but operate life. And when we allow the Creator to operate life, life looks like it should look. But when we choose to operate it on our own, the Creator of life, who will not by us be permitted to operate life, knows how to terminate life. So they understood it was either natural or supernatural. But in our Western culture, we've been taught that illness should be healed through unnatural means. Unnatural means, instead of taking what God has made, and using it for the body he's made, or teaching the body or allowing the body to operate as it was designed to operate through adequate rest, etc., we're told are supernatural, that is, healing the spirit and soul so that the body can manifest that wholeness. We're taught, let man put some stuff together that are poisons to the body, what he calls medicine. So that those poisons can cure symptoms but not fix condition. And when we use unnatural approaches versus the natural or the supernatural, we end up finding that we've altered God's design. And whenever we alter God's design, we're headed for disaster. If I had time, I'd walk through some miracles and show you that even the miracles that Jesus performed didn't change God's design. It may have multiplied it, it may have accelerated it, but he never changed God's design. If he multiplied bread, he took it from barley loaves. Which means there was seed in it. It would have multiplied anyway. He just accelerated the process. If he multiplies fish, he doesn't just take one fish, he takes two fish, which means they would multiply anyway. He just accelerated the process. So miracles were not altering God's design. It was either accelerating or multiplying God's design. But this man knows that this boy's condition is a consequence of him not protecting his son from some spiritual or soul malady. It happened under this man's watch. And so whatever happened, had this man so riddled with guilt, he wants mercy for allowing this infection to fall on his son. The man explains the depth of his concern. He says, it is because this spiritual malady is threatening my son's life. Throws him in the water to drown him, or in the fire to be burned. It seeks to kill him. Amen. I want to ask you rhetorically, what quality of life can a parent have when their negligence produces their child's death? What reprieve from guilt can be prescribed to a negligent parent whose negligence yields their child to become a casualty? What therapy can you give a person whose own child is dead because they weren't doing what they should have been doing? This man knows that in guilt, he is partly responsible for the tormented condition that has fallen on his son. And so he says, compassion is appreciated. Jesus says something that our traditional religion would ignore, because as this man recognizes compassion in the Greek, in the King James Version it says, have compassion. But in the Greek it really says, since you are showing compassion, is there anything you can do? The Greek says, in the Greek translation, the mere fact that you are showing interest shows that you care. But is there something tangible you can do? If you're suffering, you want somebody to care. You know, if you come to a prayer warrior and tell them what you're going through and they're too busy to listen, that hurts you deep. If you go to a loved one and you try to share with them what you're facing and they rub it off as insignificant, and they show indifference, that can hurt you. But if you find a stranger that cares, that can mean a whole lot.
Amen. Amen.
But how many of you know, even if you find somebody who cares, their compassion doesn't fix the problem. You need more than just somebody who sympathizes. You need somebody who can do something. And this man says, I recognize that you have compassion. I recognize that you are showing mercy to me. I recognize that you know that under my watch I failed, and yet you are taking time to talk to me and deal with this dilemma. But beyond your compassion, can you do something? One of the things that has held back the potential of the church of Jesus Christ in modern times is that we come to church and we often get compassion. But then we have to leave church trying to find somebody who can do something. We have economic challenges, so we come to church so we can be around other economically challenged people, so we can all come together and talk about how bad it is and then tell each other we're going to make it. But then we have to leave church and try and get some help. We have physical illnesses, so we come to church so that people can pray for us, not because we expect their prayer to heal us, but if they pray for us, at least God might be merciful and allow us to endure it until we find somebody who can help us. And Jesus wants us to learn that we ought to be a people who show more than just compassion, but we can help somebody. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a word or song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. That's what ministries are for. The preaching points you to Jesus. The teaching gives you principles on how to live for Jesus. And the ministries are there to help you along the way. This man says, if I know you care, but can you do anything to help us out? And Jesus says something very different than what our traditional religion would have us hear.
Amen. Amen.
We saw in Bible study Tuesday night that these dialogues with Jesus, in a strict sense, should not be interpreted as prayer.
Amen. Amen.
Because these are not individuals calling on God, Jehovah, Elohim. They are crying out to a man who is reputed to have healing power. They don't understand him as the divine yet, because in many of these miracles, he discloses who he is after he performs the miracle. It is the miracle that brings attention to who he is. So they're not believing on him as God. They are looking in their desperation to somebody who has a reputation of possibly being able to help them. It is no different than you going to one doctor and it doesn't help, and you going to another doctor and it doesn't help, and somebody says, oh no, you need to try Dr. So-and-so. When I went, that doctor told me something very different than them doctors told you, and I'm better now. And so now you say, if I can just get to that doctor. These people are hearing that Jesus can perform miracles, and he is performing miracles, and they're thinking to themselves, I've tried everything and nobody can help me. If I can just get to Dr. Jesus. And so they're not looking to him to be God, they're looking for him to be help in their present circumstance. And Jesus says something that our traditional religion has not taught us to hear. He says to the man, no, not if I can do something, if you can. That's one of the flaws of our faith, is that oftentimes we are crying out to God to do stuff that if we had faith, we'd do ourselves. Jesus, like Peter and John to that lame man, is saying to us, rise up and walk. But instead we're sitting waiting on him to lift us up. But I want to tell you, sometimes he will not lift you up. You got to stand up yourself. Sometimes he will not make a way. You have to create your own way. So someone said there was a panel going on about prayer in this country and how things should be changed. And one person from the Christian community said, pointing to the Jew, that we ought pray more. We learned in our Christian tradition that we ought pray, and we learned it from you all. And the Jew said to them, no, but don't misunderstand prayer. My prayer has feet. I don't pray so that I don't have to get up. I pray so that I will get up. Sometimes the change will not be made just because you've been on your knees. It's what you do when you get off your knees. That's the biggest challenge we face in Black America right now. Amen. We have always, in this country, faced systemic racism. And y'all, the likelihood of that changing overnight is between slim and none. If it didn't change under 8 years of an African American president, I don't hold too much hope with the candidates we got coming out. But our foreparents saw something that the slave owner didn't want them to see. They said, before I be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. That they heard all kind of negative racist slurs thrown at them and dogs barking, chasing after them. And they said, up above my head, I hear music in the air. I really do believe there's a God somewhere. When they finally got their houses, they didn't have houses like we complain about today. For them, newspaper was their wallpaper. But they said, I looked all around me and it looked so fine. I asked the Lord if it all was mine. They saw something that the slave owner didn't want them to see. And now we've come from so far. And now we don't want to hold each other accountable. If you're white and you try to hold black folk accountable, you're considered racist. And I can understand that. But then if you're black and you try to hold black folk accountable, you're considered a sellout. We just want to protest, complain, and cry that we don't have our 40 acres and a mule, and they ain't giving it up. So if they don't have sense enough to recognize our genius at the Oscars, honor each other. Help me, somebody. If you really want to show how pro-black you are, don't spend all your time talking about the racist white church. Make your church great so that the racist white church will want to be like you. Jesus says, no, stop looking for other folk to do something for you. If you can. We have this cycle. We take our children to school and wait for the schools to educate our children. When it's our job to educate our children, the schools just help us out. Literature in schools is about to change. Since we've been protesting Black history and civil rights education, under our African American president. The new civil rights issue has become LGBT. So now the school literature will begin to incorporate homosexual and lesbian history. Now, if you just stand passively by and say, school, educate my children, you are not protecting your children. You have to educate them, and you've got to take them to school, but don't let the schools be the dominant force in your child's psyche. We're just crying out, school, help us. We take them to the doctor. The doctor tells us all kind of stuff. All these shots that suddenly they need. And we don't even know what's in it. One shot infects the child. We say, thank you, doctor. Pay them and feel relieved. And then some other stuff shows up that's often connected to the shot they gave you, but now they got to give another shot. But we take them without doing any research, without asking any questions. We're just saying, please, Mr. and Mrs. Doctor, come help us. Then we're so busy with our lives. We look for after-school programs. So we can drop them off so they can be entertained elsewhere. And then when they don't have enough after-school programs, then we buy them gadgets to entertain them at home while we do our thing. Just constantly crying out, come on over here, help us. We drop them off at friends' houses they barely know. Almost went somewhere, but let me stay there. We drop them off, and then they get involved in activities that we say, I didn't raise you to act like that. Well, you ain't raising them, their friends are. Crying out, come on over here, help us. If you can do anything, we let them watch whatever on TV, listen to whatever as it relates to their music, communicate however on social media. So they got social media and I don't check it because, you know, they're human. They deserve their privacy. With freedom comes responsibility. And if you are responsible to pay for your social media, then the person who pays for it has a right to check it. Had a friend years ago who was a mortician, and one time I just went by the funeral home, and while there was a lot of screaming going on. I said, let me get out of here. But before I could get out, I heard her say, well, who's paying? And one person said, I'm paying. She said, well, with all due respect, the rest of you may leave. You can't call no shots if you ain't paying no bill. But we can allow all of these foreign spirits to come to our children, where their spirits get defiled, their souls get messed up, then their bodies manifested, and then all of a sudden we're wondering, how did we get to that point? And we start crying out, come help us, come help us. And Jesus said, no, no, brother, if you can. Liberation theology helped us in its inception, and nothing I say is intended to condemn or criticize liberation theology. Liberation theology is an interpretation of the Christian faith out of the experience of the poor. It is good news to the oppressed. Its focus is on social justice and equality. I do not negate or dispute its service to our community. But there is this other dynamic where we must stop looking for others to come bail us out. We must stand up and do for ourselves. Folk tried to get me to volunteer going to jail in the fight to keep Cooper Green open. I knew it was time for me to leave. I said, I'd rather fight for us to pull our resources together and maintain our own Cooper Green than fight asking 5 people to side in a vote to our behalf. You got problems with the wire, with Sports First or other places? Build your own gym. We already got one. Somebody said, well, it ain't as big as the Y. It doesn't have to be. If it has the equipment, use the equipment. And if you show that it's needed, other folk will come and help you build it. We must exercise enough faith in ourselves to improve our own lives. God is not a cosmic bellhop where your wish becomes his command. Faith is not some way where you can sit idly by and make no personal changes and God just mysteriously and miraculously imposes blessings upon you. No, you must exercise enough faith to improve your thinking. You've got to exercise enough faith to start reading different books. You have to exercise enough faith to start watching other television shows. Don't spend all your energy and all your money watching other folk become rich while you remain broke. We've got to develop our families. We've got to build our communities. We have to strengthen our churches. We have to elevate our expectations. We have to practice the right principles. We have to disciple our descendants. We must take responsibility for the outcomes. We must do something and stop waiting for somebody to come and bail us out. Jesus says, no, brother, if you can. That's what got you in this mess. You were trusting somebody else to come in and they didn't do what you thought they were going to do. Now your boy is tormented and you haven't learned your lesson yet. You're still taking him here and there trying to find somebody to do what you ought to be doing. If you can believe, all things are possible to them that believe. Folk hate you, you got to keep loving. They talk about you got to keep praying. You can't let them change you. If they laugh at you, you still keep smiling. If they knock you down, you just get back up. If they throw you against the ropes, keep swinging. And if they kill you, rise again. But don't let people dictate who you are. Litigate if we must go to court. Mediate if there's dissension amongst us. Castigate if there's a human cancer in our midst. Obliterate any doubt. Create what's needed if it doesn't exist. Crosses are ours, we got to carry them. Burdens are ours, we must bear them. Storms are ours, we must wear them. Weather them. Enemies are ours, we must love them. And troubles are ours, we must take them. But we must take responsibility for the outcome ourselves. If you can.
Yes, sir.
If you can. Most of us don't like to hear that. But if you can. Is your life a mess? Well, get enough faith to fix it. But Pastor, you don't know what kind of parents I had. Well, no child exits childhood unscarred. Get over it. next generation better than this generation. Stop belly aching. Stop complaining. Stop crying. Get up if you can. So Jesus hears this man's cry. He goes on and helps this son. But he's not helping this son because of the son. He's helping the son because the man is saying, I've got trouble with my unbelief. And Jesus is really saying to him, well, I'm going to do something for you this time. To let you know that you can believe yourself as a future reference. That's what Christ did for us. He said to us, no, I'm not going to rush to your assistance every time you call with some material request. I'm not coming to your aid every time you cry because this life is inconvenient for you. But I'm going to show you what can happen if you just learn to believe. He says to us, I believe so much in the Father's goodwill that I left the praises of angels to come to the curses of men. I left the forecast where every day was comfort to come sweat in this heat and shiver in this cold. I left a land where death had never been heard of to come here and suffer and die. I believe the Father so much that I died not because I loved you, but because my Father loved you. John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. The book of Romans says, God committed his love toward us while we were yet sinners. Christ died. God loved us, and Christ obeyed God. You got a faith problem? Jesus says, you shouldn't. Because I showed you what happens when you believe. You may have to see some dark days before you see the light of day. But Martin King says only when it's dark enough can you see the stars. Midnight always comes before daybreak. Do I have a witness here? And if you can just believe enough to endure the darkness of the night, if you can believe enough to face the struggles of progress, if you can just believe long enough to get up, and even though your legs may be weak and you find yourself stumbling, but you keep putting one foot above in front of the other foot, if you can just believe, you can make a difference. Some of us at 23rd Street, we're just waiting on the Spirit of God to move through here. So that something miraculous will happen. But I want to tell you, y'all, it ain't going to happen that way. Something miraculous got to happen in you where you would get up and make something happen. Do I have a witness here? You got to create it if it doesn't exist. Blaze a trail if it doesn't exist. You got to be the change you want to see. And I said this morning, our 4-parent song, there's a bright side. Somewhere. Don't you stop till you find it. There a bright side somewhere. Isn't it amazing that if I told you that if you just believe God and you shout hallelujah 3 times, your victory would come? There'd be some folks shouting right now. Because we want a whole lot for a whole little. But it doesn't work that way. You got to get up and you got to believe and you got to be the difference you want to see. Something wrong with this man. But thank God. If he can get his faith right, he can see a change. Not only in his life, but in his descendants' life. Every head is bowed. Every eye is closed. Every person here